This is the story of Brisbane and a group of 4 suburban boys who would unwittingly play a part in changing the world's musical landscape forever. The Saints. The evolution, the revolution, and the repercussions.
The whole music business needed a kick up the arse, and it got it.
So are you a student of punk?
Yes, I think I am a student of punk. I grew up with punk. I was really influenced by punk. It kind of influenced my, I think, my approach to life in a lot of ways.
How so?
I think the DIY thing. So, it was like what I really loved about it. It was kind of anyone could do anything. I'm a drummer as well. So I'm a filmmaker and a drummer.
Yep.
And so, I had no formal training in music, so I thought I just wanted to play drums and I wanted to be in a band, and that's what we did. And I still play music now, and I'm still the stuff we play is still influencing what we do today, which is really good. I think in terms of filmmaking, again, I had some slight formal qualifications, but the idea was, again, it was a punk aesthetic. It was like I just wanted to do this. I think I knew what I was doing. I wanted to say something. And, went off. And then we, again, just in terms of a history of it, we started a film production company, when we left uni. A friend of mine and myself was still going.
Yep.
And it's quite a successful company now internationally. So we're doing okay.
keeping busy. That's good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So this Saints album, Stranded, actually, you made it a little while ago, right?
Yes. This film about 5.5, 6 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
for the agency. Yeah.
What made you think that you needed to make a film about the Saints at that time?
Oh, look, I think the Saints is one of those stories that is again, there's so many stories that kind of need to be told. They're I always think of these stories as sort of these seedings, you know what I mean? There are these moments in time which actually sort of, I think, spark something, and they may not. The instigators of these things may not end up being incredibly successful or commercially enormous or household names, but the idea is that they are all part of this kind of mechanism that seeds movement and ideas and culture, and the Saints are one of those. And I think, look, especially if you talk about a sort of punk scholar thing, I think they were the first guys to release an independent single that globally. And we talk about, everyone knows about Spiral Scratch by the Buzzcocks being one of the first DIY independent releases from the punk movement. But the Saints were there before them, and I think the Ramones were signed to a major label. The Pistols were signed to a major label. So it's one of those moments that I think is really interesting. And I think, again, coming from where they came from, Brisbane, and Brisbane then was this large country town, which was, Queensland was run by Joe Bjelke-Peterson. And if you know anything about him,
yes.
This oppressive, really ultra-conservative, repressive kind of environment. And, whether the music is a reaction to that or not, I'm not sure. But
because I was going to ask you if you thought that the Saints would have made the same music if it had been a different political climate.
I think it's one of those things. And again, it's this interesting thing about punk. And look, this happened in Manchester. It happened in, London. It happened in New York. It happened in... I mean, you talk about grunge in Seattle, it's a similar thing, it's I think what we get is suburban kids who want to do something and say something, and they get together and they make music, because that's one of the ways you can express yourself. And the interesting thing about Stranded is, I think, if you listen to the lyrics and the sentiment of the song, I'm stranded here on my own, in the suburban kind of wasteland. We've got the Buzzcocks saying boredom, on their first single. You've got Penetration, Pauline Murray's in the film. And she's talking about Don't Dictate. And you've got these things happening in Ireland and, in New York and, all over the world. I think it's a sentiment that kind of collectively coalesces and then sort of becomes this movement, But it's a very strange... What I think is really fascinating about this, I think, is it's this sort of global synchronicity. I don't know what it is, and I
Right.
can't
'Cause
explain.
for myself, I was in upstate New York at the time. I was working in
Yes.
a record shop, you know,
Yes.
and of course we all knew about the Ramones and Patti Smith and television
Yes.
because they were
Yes.
down not too far away from us. But then
Yes.
suddenly all this stuff happened from England. And then when the Saints showed up, it was like, what's this? It's even happening in Australia. And I've got my copy of the album right here.
There you go.
That's from
Good on you.
the day I got all of them.
That is fantastic. That's great. There's certainly yours and Prehistoric Sounds there, right? That's great.
Yep. So, you know, we were all just like, what the heck? How is this happening everywhere?
Well, this is interesting, and I think you think about it, and we sort of touch on it a little bit, I think, in the film. But you know, this is pre-internet. This is you know, it cost a fortune to make an interstate phone call. You know what I mean? How did everybody kind of? How did this happen at the same time? It's fascinating.
So, did you have any trouble getting the Saints themselves to cooperate with you making this film?
There was the pretty good buy-in from everybody. Chris Bailey was probably a little reticent, I think, because he's really done his own thing, and I don't think he's a very nostalgic sort of guy.
Right, and he's kind of kept the name going forever, anyway. Right.
That's right. He has, yes, in many incarnations, as you well know.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, it's interesting because probably from the point of view an American, the Saints as a brand became even more well-known in the 80s when Chris was just doing his own version of the Saints, and they got signed to a major label and whatever. So did you have any thoughts about, because I know you end the story kind of with the 3 albums with the original band.
Yes.
Did you think about extending it out?
No, because I think that nucleus, obviously, Chris and Ed are really that initial nucleus, you know. That's that sort of, there is obviously there became quite a bit of friction, I think, in their relationship as things moved on, but they were the spark, those two. And I think, you know, when Chris continued with the Saints, I think it was a different kind of thing, and it was kind of his in a sense, his voice, his idea of what the Saints should be. But I think that those 3 albums, and it's funny again, sort of being a bit of a music nerd, you know, you always look back at a lot of bands, and there's especially those original lineups, the first 3 albums are always this kind of special suite of kind of time, place, expression, if you understand what I mean.
Absolutely. Well, I remember being totally blown away with Prehistoric Sounds, because they had the nerve to use horns in it. I was like, well, you can't do that, can you? It's just guitars and drums, isn't it?
No, totally. And I think, again, I mean, I'm sure you're obviously very well versed, you know, but you see this idea that I don't think, again, they were, excuse me, I don't think they were actually, you know, the intention wasn't to be this sort of punk rock band. You know, they were kind of just a really loose rock band who had this sound that kind of resonated and with a movement. But I think with any musicians, I think the idea is to just keep exploring and to keep evolving and to keep becoming something else. And I think they really proved that in those first 3 albums, you know, and I think that journey.
Definitely. Now, when you were making the film, you know, because there's the Saints story in Brisbane, and then there's the wider story, and to give it some perspective. So how did you come about kind of balancing all those different strands to make a coherent story?
Well, I think they're pretty straight up, really, when you think about it. You know, again, you know, I come back to that idea of the seeding mechanism. You know, well, I always talk about I don't know if you know the Free Trade Hall in Manchester. There was a gig. Of course,
everybody was there. Everybody
was there. Well, there was actually only 30 people there, but everybody started a band, if you understand what I mean. And I think it's a very similar thing when you have a sort of an act like the Saints, where they sort of kicked off this kind of energy, and everybody said, wow. And again, at that time, and I think if you sort of bring in, and you know, I'm always hesitant about the punk thing, because I think it got labeled and it became something it wasn't. But we talk about that sort of, I'll use the term punk, but I think, as of what I was saying before, people were inspired by that. You didn't have to be a classically trained musician. I'm going to pick up a guitar. I'm going to write some songs, and that seeding mechanism again starts that kind of, you know. And we don't have Powderfinger or the Go-Betweens or any of those bands without the Saints. I really do believe that. You know, it's again, you've got, especially in that environment, which is so oppressive and so conservative and so stifling. And as you well know, conservative governments, you know, I think, or conservative powers culture is the enemy of those because they always
Definitely.
hold up,
Yep.
you know, they hold up the mirror and
Bunch of weirdos and freaks.
yeah, exactly. So it's even more interesting to see that sort of evolution of the Brisbane scene. And, you know, Brisbane now is a really hip, cultural city. It's a really amazing, vibrant cultural city. So, you know, it's
Ironically,
nice
I think the last time I was in Brisbane, I saw Patti Smith there. So there you go.
There you go. Full circle for you.
She had a film out at the time. And
yeah. So it's fascinating. And I think, look, that political narrative also underpins that evolution of Brisbane.
Right.
And there is, you know, there is a connection with the Saints for them looking back, you know, and in prehistoric sounds, they write about Brisbane and, you know, Brisbane security city, you know, so there's a sort of reflection on where they'd come from and what that was about. So it's really interesting.
Yep. And so did you have any difficulty getting comments from the British punk rockers about the Saints?
Not at all, because they're huge fans. They're all huge.
I figured
fans.
they would.
So you've got well, Geldof is a huge fan. He is actually a huge fan, and he was there at the marquee when the Saints played with the Ramones and Talking Heads. And Biafra was there at the marquee. Jello Biafra was actually in London at the marquee when he saw the Saints and went, "Wow!" You know.
Right.
And Pauline Murray was in that mix, you know, and Steve Diggle, obviously, you know, the Buzzcocks.
Yep.
There's a resonance there as well. So everyone, they're huge fans. And I think you talk to a lot of people still today, musicians talk about that, especially that first album. How much it meant to them. So
and you mix in a lot of 50s and early 60s kind of black and white kind of stuff. So how did you go about thinking about using that material to tell the story?
I think we just wanted to have this juxtaposition of this sort of you know, again, those 50s films and those sci-fi films, that idea of sort of something strange happening and something, you know, you've got this normality and this strangeness, and it comes into the environment and changes things and kind of scares people. And I think that was kind of one of the ideas behind that. It was a play, really, to sort of say, hey, that this was a catalyst within a really conservative kind of, this is something from outer space, if you understand what I mean.
Absolutely.
So that's where that came from.
Yeah. So the film was finished 5 years ago. Has it aged well, in your opinion?
It's funny. Marty, haven't revisited it for a while, actually. This was really lovely to sort of, you know, I'm not very good with the old nostalgia, sort of looking back, always moving forward. And, but it was nice to reflect on it. And I think it's still, I still read or hear people talking about the influence the band had on them and contemporary culture. And, you know, again, they're part of this bigger picture. They're one element of this bigger picture that actually sort of gave probably you and I a contemporary cultural touchstone. You know, we talk about the music we like and what's evolved from that, and whether it's, you know, fanzines became the magazines, and you know, or blogs or internet. So, you know, all that. This idea that we can all sort of express ourselves and collectively have a sort of cultural touchstone that sort of talks to us, really, and is part of our lives. So I'm really pleased that we were able to sort of give them that little voice, I suppose, really.
Yeah. It seems like Ed's still pretty active, isn't he? I think he was here a couple of years ago before COVID and did a solo show.
He's been doing his solo tour on and off. It's been interesting. I've been watching that because COVID lockdowns have sort of been pulling his tour, I think, across Australia. And he's managed to sort of reschedule and pop in here and get out there and live there. And so he's I think that's a sort of career retrospective show that he's doing with, is it Jim White? He and Jim White.
I think so. Yeah, I think Jim White. Yeah, from the Dirty Free. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so that looks phenomenal. He hasn't been. I think we've been cancelled here twice. So I haven't got to see the show. So it's because of
it seems very punk in some ways, doesn't it? You have to kind of hit and run and hope for the best and see what happens.
Exactly. Exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, are many of those old venues still around, or any of those venues around in Brisbane?
I don't think there are many. of those, Brisbane went through again what Joe did. He was very well known for rolling in the bulldozers at midnight,
Right.
and knocking down beautiful old theaters and beautiful old venues.
Right.
Because he had the developers were in his pocket, and
Sure.
It was a pretty dodgy sort of time. So a lot of that old Brisbane is gone now, and so it's very sad, really, to be honest.
Yep. But and how's the music scene there these days? Do you think it's thriving?
I think it's come back. Look, I think the last 18 months has been appalling for everybody, and
Right.
I think we've seen venues close, and it's been very hard for a lot of people, I think, honestly. So I'm not quite sure what the status is at the moment.
Yeah.
But we had there's the Triffid there that is a really good venue up there, and it's that's run by one of the Powderfinger guys, and
Right.
that's a phenomenal venue,
Yep.
and they've got the Saints I'm Stranded out there on the wall, painted
Oh,
on
there
the
you
wall, just sort of touch it again. So
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you said at the beginning, I know you're doing a lot of other stuff, filmmaking wise and all that. Any more music projects in the works?
Look, I'd like to. I really would like to. I had one. I've got one in early development, and I won't talk much about that because it may not go anywhere. But
Right.
there's another music film I really like to do, and I did a movie on the influence of Hong Kong Kung Fu cinema a couple of years ago, which did really well, and that
Right.
sort of ended up on Netflix. And so I like that sort of pop culture influence. I love I think the idea of the pop culture being a sort of, again, a catalyst and a mechanism within history, and how it sort of evolves and how it changes things in a broader sense. So that's where I sort of come from.
All righty. Well, very good. Well, thanks for sharing all that with me. So I guess the film is going to show at some point around here somewhere. I'm
I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased it's getting a run, and I really do hope people enjoy it. And I hope they can sort of just get a little bit of an insight into something that I think was pretty important.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.
Marty, thanks very much. Lovely to talk to you, and take care of yourself. All right.
You too. All right.
All right. Cheers.